And thank you everyone for joining. So today I'll be talking about podcasts as a medium for online learning, starting with a definition. A podcast is a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. So this is more of a dictionary definition. There are a few more keywords that define the basics of podcasting. Namely, podcasts cover almost any topic, are typically free and on demand. This means anyone can access them at any time about any one thing and across a variety of platforms, all for free. A quick note on the difference between radio and podcast, because it's not always that obvious. And it can get confusing because a lot of radio stations have caught on to the fact that podcasts are an overwhelmingly popular form of entertainment. So they'll often take the best bits of their live shows and turn them into a podcast that can be listened to later after the live show is ended. So they essentially create a podcast from repurposed content. So the main difference being that radio is scheduled and podcasts are on demand. With radio, listeners have to tune in at a specific time. With podcasts, listeners can download all of the episodes currently available and listen to those episodes whenever they want, which is why podcasts are so popular. And obviously that difference is due to the fact that radio is live and podcasts are pre-recorded and heavily edited. A third difference, which doesn't really confuse people, but it's really important to the popularity of podcasts, is mass appeal versus niche. Radio shows try to appeal to as many people as possible so that they create content on a wide range of topics to entice as many listeners as possible, whereas podcasts appeal to a more niche audience due to their focus on individual topics. And I'll explore that idea of mass appeal versus niche more throughout this presentation. And now a very, very brief history of podcasts, just for some context. So the word podcast is actually a portmanteau of the words iPod and broadcast. The first iPod debuted in 2001, and in 2004, a plan was devised that would enable the download of online radio broadcasts from the internet directly to the iPod. So in the same way today that radio stations turn their live shows into a podcast. So for the first time, in 2004, radio broadcast files could be stored on a portable player and listened to on the go. In 2005, podcasts began to gain traction. It was the year that the new Oxford American Dictionary named podcast the word of the year, cementing the status of podcasts as an emerging media trend. From 2006 to 2013, podcasts became mainstream. There were podcasting awards, podcasting tours, and even Queen Elizabeth's Christmas Day speech was made available to download as a podcast. And then 2014 was a watershed moment for podcasts with the release of Serial, an investigative journalism podcast, which you may have heard of. It was the first podcast to win a Peabody Award, and it spawned a number of other podcasts in the true crime genre. In the 5 years after the release of Serial, the number of monthly podcast listeners in America doubled. And then today, there are now dozens and dozens of podcasting networks and companies in the US. By 2019, 90 million Americans listen to a podcast monthly. I'll show some more statistics on the next slide just to show how popular podcasts really are. As of June 2021, there are over 2 million podcasts available and over 48 million episodes available. 50% of all of US homes are podcast fans, 24% listen to podcasts weekly, 90% of listening is done at home, and 64% listen while driving, which is an important point and something I'll talk more about later. Podcast listeners listen to an average of 7 different shows per week. 93% listen to all or most of each episode, which is really important as all of our attention spans are very short nowadays. So the fact that most people listen to all or most of each episode just shows you how much people love them. And education, news, and comedy are the most popular genres. So now onto a few reasons why podcasts are so popular in the first place. First, they're easy to access. There are dozens of podcasting apps. Often there's already a native app built into each phone. And the biggest benefit is that most podcasts are free. So this easy and free access makes podcasting a popular option for entertainment and knowledge. Second, you can listen to exactly what interests you, which is what I was talking about earlier with mass appeal versus niche. There are over 48 million episodes available, so chances are that whatever subject interests you, there's a podcast on that very subject. They're also multitask friendly. Again, like I said, most people don't just listen to a podcast episode. They listen while they're driving, cleaning, cooking, working, exercising. I'm guilty of all of those. And it's that ability to be put on as an entertaining or informative background noise that makes podcasts so popular. Fourth, they build intimacy between the listener and the host or hosts. Listening to a podcast often feels like enjoying a discussion with friends. Podcast hosts also tend to be a lot more accessible than most typical media personalities. So that relationship that's established keeps listeners coming back. With several or all of the podcasts I listen to, I definitely feel that. It feels like I'm just listening to friends. And finally, they provide an instant community, which becomes a private space to interact with hosts and with other members of that community. So a lot of these you all touched on. Podcasts can make it easier for students to catch up. So students who opt for online courses typically do so because they have other responsibilities or time commitments that prevent them from attending in-person courses, as I'm sure you're all aware. So whether that be a job, maybe even two jobs, kids, they're the caretaker of elderly parents, whatever it may be, when they have those other responsibilities, it can be easy to fall behind on work, which becomes very overwhelming and discouraging. So podcasts could be the solution for when they fall behind. The ability to multitask while doing schoolwork is really attractive to students. If they weren't able to complete the reading that week, they could simply listen to your podcast on their way to work, while folding laundry, to catch up. This could combat the stress of falling behind. Next, listening might be better than watching or reading. It's said that visuals grab attention, but audio holds on to it. So your brain has to work at the pace of the audio, so your mind can't wander off like it does when you're reading a textbook. And because you have to actively think about what you're hearing, you can't only half pay attention like you might with a video. Podcasts can also make teaching more accessible. So for people with visual impairments or dyslexia, textbooks can be an uphill struggle. Instead of relying solely on written material and videos, podcasts give students more options in how they work. Podcasts also incorporate passive learning into the pedagogical approach. So students can listen to the podcast covering the essential information for the course on their own, and then be ready to fully explore that material when they sit down to work through the modules where they're actively learning. Podcasts also help accommodate all learning styles. So different people prefer different styles of learning. Variety is key to keep all students engaged. Adding auditory learning to the usual reading, writing, and video helps create a more even playing field for everyone. And again, as it was mentioned before, it makes the course content more accessible to all. And finally, podcasts are the perfect revision tool. Students can go at their own pace, pausing and replaying parts they need more time on. Being able to remind themselves of previous lessons when they want can be a valuable resource when preparing for exams. So to be able to talk about podcasts in education, we should first categorize the types of podcasts that can be used in education. So I'll be using this categorization, which divides podcasts into two main categories: podcasts created by instructors, and external podcasts. Then podcasts produced by instructors are divided into two categories: lecture podcasts and podcasts developed for specific pedagogical functions. So back to the reason I mentioned earlier, why podcasts are so popular is that they provide an instant community. This is especially important for distance learning. So by the way, I'm talking here about the instructor-created podcasts. So Lack of interaction is a key problem for online students. Distance education can feel like a lonely experience. They might feel isolated and less a member of a group compared to students in face-to-face classes, which can lead to motivational problems for some students. It's been found that instructor-made podcasts can play a role in reducing feelings of isolation and in promoting a sense of belonging to a community, which therefore increases a student's motivation. One study found that podcasts increased the feeling of proximity between students and teachers because the students had a feeling of permanent presence of the teachers. As a result, the podcasts enhanced students' motivation. A review study suggested that the use of podcasts could create a greater sense of rapport and intimacy. And then a final study found that podcasts were effective in reducing isolation-induced anxiety and in promoting a sense of inclusivity and belonging to a learning community for distance education students.
All right, looks like we have a question from Dr. LeConte asking, will podcasts count towards required video hours for online courses?
Yeah, I was going to say I will jump in on that. Excellent question. Thank you. And I am not aware of any required video time, but this definitely comes under the category of media. So I would think that it would cover in any situation, but we can talk about that if you like.
Back to the instructor-created podcasts, I'm going to start with specific pedagogical functions, and then I'll talk about recorded lectures in a bit. So just of production in general, one of the best things about podcasts is their versatility. So there's a lot of freedom left to the creator. Will you opt for short form or long form? The average podcast is about 45 minutes, but episodes can be as short as 5 minutes or over an hour, even 2. How often will you release your episodes? Most episodes release weekly, some bi-weekly or monthly. It doesn't matter so much which release schedule you choose or how often you release them. It's just more important to be consistent. How many hosts and guests will you have? Just one host and one weekly guest, 2 to 3 hosts, and maybe the occasional guest. And finally, what is the purpose of the podcast? To educate, explain, entertain, motivate. All of those questions will be answered based on the subject being covered, your audience, your personal preference, and various other factors. So some specific pedagogical functions that podcasts can be used for: structuring the study to prepare students for core learning activities. So short podcasts can give students a lead-in to an outline of each chapter of a textbook, a motivation on why topics are included, and hints for study. These types of podcasts can help online students efficiently manage their time. Preparing for exams, episodes can look back on learning objectives, discuss previous exams, and/or summarize the main topics. Podcasts can give additional explanations of subject matter known to be hard for students to understand. They can also be used to give feedback. Episodes can review learning outcomes, comment upon electronic discussions, or give feedback to assignments. And then finally, promote active student engagement. So to persuade students to become active, each podcast could result in an explicit invitation to solve an assignment or start a discussion on the subject matter. And I'm sure there's many more functions that you could think of. 5 genres of podcasts that would work really well in an online course.
Emily, may I interrupt? I apologize. Add a comment that came up that this could also be a really nice format for review.
Yeah.
Or, to prepare for an exam.
Yeah, and a lot of my research, that seemed to be a very popular way to incorporate podcasts into an online course, because the student can listen to it as many times as they need to, even rewinding, go back to a specific part, so they can be really useful. Another thing that, if going back to the versatility, I know We've had some faculty that also just aren't that comfortable on camera. And while we strongly encourage that you at least include a personal course introduction, maybe module introductions, because it's important that the student sees your face for that connection. But you have podcasts as an option as well for those people who are less comfortable on camera. It can take away a lot of that anxiety of being in the studio. So the first genre that can be really good in an online course is the chat show or a panel. So this format is characterized by a panel of experts coming together to discuss a topic. The experts examine and critique a topic from all sides. One of the benefits of this style is it exposes students to some of the top minds within the field and gives them a chance to hear competing perspectives on complex topics covered in class. Such podcasts are therefore valuable for their capacity to model higher order skills like critical thinking and debate. An example of this format is Infinite Monkey Cage. I think it's by BBC. So in this podcast, there are 3 guests, 2 scientists with an interest in the topic being discussed, offering expert opinion on the subject, and then they're joined by a comedian who is less knowledgeable and asks basic questions, making the show more accessible for a general audience. The next format that you could use is the narrative. So this is using the podcast Serial that I mentioned earlier. So this involves one presenter telling the listener stories from within their niche. This format allows the listeners to immerse themselves into a richly painted picture of the topic. With this format, students can move beyond simply remembering and understanding toward analysis and evaluation based on a rich understanding of the content. An example of this is Revisionist History, which is hosted by journalist, author, and public speaker Malcolm Gladwell. So in this podcast, the description is it's a journey through the overlooked and the misunderstood. Every episode re-examines something from the past, an event, a person, an idea, even a song, and asks whether we got it right the first time. The next format is the tutorial. So here, the intention is to directly educate the listener through a scaffolded lesson on a topic. In this format, there is often a host and a guest, a learner. The host walks the learner through tasks by breaking them down into bite-sized chunks. Typical pedagogical strategies used in tutorial podcasts include modeling, strategic pausing, and gradual removal of support as the lessons progress. So for distance learners, this mimics the learning experience that they would have with a face-to-face instructor. A classic example is the podcast Coffee Break Spanish. So in this podcast, the host, Mark, will often break down a phrase into its syllables, ask the listener to repeat after him, and then pause to allow the listener to speak into the silence. Then Mark's in-studio guest, the learner, will repeat the phrase to model how the ideal student would have responded. As the lessons progress, simple phrases are no longer broken down into syllables, and more complex tasks involving comprehension are used instead. So here the scaffolding is gradually removed as students develop through the course content. But this format isn't just for language learning. The author of the article where these formats were discussed uses tutorial style podcasts with quizzes at strategic points. So for example, he employs a ticking countdown clock noise to give students time to come up with answers to questions before he provides the correct answer.
I want to go back to hi and thank you for hosting this. It's very exciting. Always looking for new ways to engage students who are otherwise reticent to either maybe speak up in class and that leads me to the question of, does this have an application or value to in-person classes, or is it exclusively an online tool?
I think you definitely could incorporate into online or into face-to-face classes because they could still listen to the podcasts as they're driving to class or as they're preparing for an exam. So I absolutely think that they could be incorporated into face-to-face classes as well.
Well, my specific area is the business communication. So it's a writing intensive, but also speaking class. And I'm trying to discern the benefit of either a podcast or, as you talked about the video, some people are not comfortable on camera, but I had been made aware of some research that said even for distance learning, they have to see your face in order to really feel part of the community. And I confess, I'm not an avid podcast listener, so it's hard for me to really understand how, other than Paula Poundstone or other comedians who you just want to listen to and enjoy. I'm trying to figure out which would be better for me, a podcast or a straight up video, because I know the COCE has provided me with a series of just killer videos that I'm using in my summer class, and it's working really well. And how I know that is no one's complaining. So kudos.
I don't think it would be an either or thing. I think they would work well together. But you don't ever want to give up those killer videos.
No, I'm keeping them forever. But I was thinking in a face-to-face class, you mentioned the different formats. You could have a two panelists who are expert and then someone asking questions on a basic level. And I was thinking the reverse. If I invited two students from my in-person class to come and do a podcast in my office where they ask questions that I know everybody else in the class wants answers to, but won't ask. I thought maybe flipping that a little bit might work.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think getting the students involved as well is really fun. I think they would enjoy that. And like I said, those were just a couple of examples I provided in terms of the combinations of guests and hosts. So you can really just play with it and do your own thing. And I think that idea sounds great. And then like Judy said, I'm not saying that you should, in your online course, do completely podcasts. Definitely still incorporate video. This could just be used as an additional thing. You could maybe create just a few really short episodes. But yeah, seeing the professor is definitely really important. So it's not a replacement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. This was is this the final? No, I have another format after this. So the quick burst. Episodes of this format can be quickly created for weekly wrap-ups of content or summaries provided to students prior to exams. So they're intended to be short, 1 to 5 minutes long, upbeat and to the point. This type of podcast might be useful to re-engage students after a mid-semester break. So again, the author of this article, he recommends dropping them into a module at the start of a weekly discussion and conclude the podcast with a stimulating question for students to respond to in the weekly discussion. So the short, engaging, and upbeat style can be used to kickstart student engagement after a brief mid-semester lull. And an example of this podcast is Writing Excuses, which is an educational podcast for writers by writers, and it has the tagline, 15 minutes long because you're in a hurry and we're not that smart. And then the final format, and these are just a few suggestions. Like we said, there's a lot of different combinations of host to guest, and there's also a lot more formats in this. These are just a few that I found that would work well in distance courses. So the interview, this one's very straightforward. It's a very, very popular format for podcasts. Episodes of this format tend to be lengthier, usually around an hour, sometimes more, but they can be as short as 15 minutes, whatever it takes to get your learning objective or your point across. So this type of podcast allows the students to hear from another expert in the field, perhaps the writer of a textbook or different stakeholders in student projects as clients and users in real-world projects. You could even maybe contact former students, graduate students. So an example of this is Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard. So each episode features Shepard and another host interviewing celebrities, journalists, and academics about the messiness of being human. Did we have a question? I think I saw something.
Yes, but I think you're going to be coming to that. Veronica Diaz wants to know about ADA compliance, and I think you cover that, don't you?
Well, maybe, do you mean like we would provide a transcription or transcript? Is that,
Yeah.
we
With
would
the
provide
best way
that.
to make podcast content available for students
Right.
who are hard of hearing. So yeah, a transcript would certainly be the most logical thing.
Yeah, just in the same way that we caption all of our videos, we would provide a transcript of the podcast. So onto recording. Recording a podcast yourself can be really easy. That's why so many people have one. All you need is a microphone and recording software. And a lot of people start out with a USB microphone that plugs right into their computer and a free recording software that's called Audacity. And then once you have made the episodes, you upload them to a hosting site. Some people even start out recording on their cell phone. So it's really, really simple. And you definitely could self-record. Obviously, the recording quality, the audio quality, will increase with the quality of the microphone. So this is where we could come in. There's the option to record in studio. We've got some really great microphones. Our equipment allows for up to 4 people. And we also have a call-in option. So we can plug a phone into the recording equipment and have allowing a person in studio to record a podcast with a remote host or guest. So circling back to the categories, I wanted to say something on recorded lectures. From what I found, it seemed that it was best to save lectures for videos. So essentially saving dense, complex material for a video. Maybe you'll have a PowerPoint for them to look at, or they'll be following along in their textbook. They'll be able to stay more engaged. An audio lecture might not be as engaging. So it would be best to chunk the class material into 5 or 6 single concepts, each serving a separate learning objective. So you, for example, could produce a series of podcast episodes, each focusing on a concept that students often have a lot of difficulty with. Having said that, I also saw that lecture episodes were a popular way to prepare for exams. So I think it would be best determined, case by case. And then now moving on to external podcasts. So podcasts produced by other organizations. So as I said before, there are over 2 million podcasts, over 48 million episodes. So chances are that there's going to be an episode or a few episodes of a podcast that would work really well as an educational resource in your course. So you could include a podcast that links directly to specific subject matter or learning goal, or something that simply motivates and inspires students. And are there any more questions?
What an amazing opportunity to think about yet another aspect to support our students' success. I really, really like this idea. So I'm going to be digging into some.
I think we had a question about from Beth.
I just had a few questions. As you were talking, some ideas came to me, and I had a few substantive questions about external podcasts. So you mentioned Malcolm Gladwell, and coincidentally, I'm trying to incorporate in my business communication course, which is an upper division undergraduate course, some information to inspire students to go out and read important business books. So books by Malcolm Gladwell, Robert Cialdini, Eliyahu Goldratt, these are all like, even Dale Carnegie. If students had a chance to maybe get a taste of what this information is like, and these fellows are infinitely better at explaining their material than I am I allowed to link to a podcast from a copyright perspective. Like, can I load a podcast into my module and have it for students who want to read more about nudge being, like how persuasion, the principles of persuasion, things like that. And I know not everybody is going to be interested in that, but at least it makes students aware of the fact that these things are out there, which I only found out about in the last 20 years of my career, which is a long time.
Yeah.
So are we allowed to do that? And
So Beth, you've used two terms in there, and I'm going to say yes on one and no on the other.
uh-oh.
You want to guess? Yeah, you can certainly link out to anything, and you would still leave, still include the citation for what you are linking to, along with probably the rationale for listening to it. Upload it into your course? No.
Okay, so linking out is fine. I just can't like take the standalone podcast episode and put it in my module.
I don't think so. I will check with the rest of the team just to verify that, but I'm almost certain that that would be a definite no. But you could link to the specific episode that you wanted. But I will certainly get back to you with a definitive answer because, as I said, this is some new territory for me anyway. So yeah.
Insofar as you'd be the one doing it, Judy, you might want to know whether I am allowed to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So
get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. Let me know what you want, and we'll make it. We'll figure it out for you. How's that for an answer?
I love that answer.
Yeah.
That's great.
And that goes with anybody on this call, because if there's something you want to make happen in your course, reach out to us. We will bend over backwards to make it happen for you.
Thank you.
And Brett, Veronica, did you want to ask a question, or do we want us to ask it for you?
The most popular one is Libsyn. I can write it down. I'd have to do more research into, there might be like a limit of how many you can host for free, but it is definitely the most popular one used. So I'll do a bit more research, and I'll be sending out a follow-up email as to where you can find this. We'll be posting this presentation on our YouTube channel, so I can let you know more about. That's a good question. It's quite easy though. So like I said, that's why everyone has a podcast nowadays.
Plus, you would also put them, if it's your own podcast, you would also put it into your course for your students.
Right. Yeah.
What a fascinating session. Thank you, Em. This is wonderful. And as always, excuse me, we will let you know where to find this find the recording for this once it is posted. So excellent. Thank you for opening our eyes to another possibility for supporting our students' success. Thank you.
I'm a huge podcast fan, so I'd be very happy to make some for online courses. And thank you all for joining and for your questions.
Oh, excellent. There you are. Now we know. Reach out to Em as well. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today.